Is this better?
I'm recording. I got that.
I'm telling you, man. This is too much future.
You just froze.
When I just talk about, my life with these guys, uh, I like to kind of make sure, in either case, that I'm trying to draw a connection between the blues and the roots of the blues and what's going, Black Lives Matter, and talk about the blues in some in some respect, at least bring up that the blues were the original voice to stand up to white supremacy,
Yeah.
and the logical place to do that, if I'm talking about, seeing Howlin' Wolf and seeing Muddy and all those guys, is to go back to the language. So, what I'll talk about is, I'm 8 years old and I'm living on the west side, and it's a changing neighborhood. And so I'm hearing music, and I'm hearing people talking on a stoop, and I'm hearing people, people sing a song, and it's not like I'd ever heard. I'm 8, I hadn't heard that much, but I could be walking down Jackson Boulevard by Columbus Park, and you could hear a car go by, and the radio is, it's Chuck Berry singing "The Coolerator was back with TV dinners and ginger ale." Now, I don't know what was in that coolerator, but I can bet you it was a lot more fun to eat than whatever was in our refrigerator. And then I could be walking by a bunch of guys sitting on a stoop, and you hear, "We're going to pitch a wang dang doodle all night long." And I knew I wasn't going to be invited to that party, and I had no idea what was going on there, but it sure was going to be a lot more fun than any party I was ever going to show up at. And then you hear Muddy Waters. There was a record store in the corner of Madison and Central, and he had a speaker that went out onto the sidewalk, and you could hear Muddy Waters singing, "I'm your hoochie coochie man." And I had no idea what he was talking about, beyond the fact that "I'm your hoochie coochie man" must have sounded a lot better to a girl than "You want to go out." So, it's like, I equate this to, we would go to movies on the west side. We'd see 3 movies for a quarter at the Alex Theater, and they'd start 10:30 in the morning. And we'd walk down there 2 miles to Garfield Park from Austin, and we'd get there half an hour early so we could go to the Walgreens and read the Mad magazines. Okay. And I'm 8, and I'm probably not getting 80% of the jokes, but I didn't hear you.
How old are you now?
I am 70.
Okay, so I got almost 8 years on you.
I'll speak louder. So you read the Mad magazines at 8 years old, and you're supposed to be getting the jokes, and you get a few of them, and you don't get most of them. But maybe a couple days later, you hear something on TV, or a month later, my dad's talking to a guy at the drugstore, and I hear something, and just a light goes on. That's what they meant in Mad Magazine. But it was tucked away in my head. And all this language I was hearing from these songs was kind of like that. It made an impression on me. So then you move forward. It's 1965. And I'm in Ray Himmel's basement, and I'm hearing the Yardbirds sing "I'm a Man." And I'm thinking, I kind of get it. It had that same swagger. And you hear the Stones, and you hear "Get Off of My Cloud," or a little bit later, "I Was Born a Crossfire Hurricane." And you feel that swagger, and it kind of harkens back to something, and you're not exactly sure what it is. And, but what I'm responding to is what all these white kids in England and a lot of white kids here in the States, but it was really the white kids that had the glam and had what it took to change everything. And it was what these English kids, it's just like a generation. Look, how do I define myself? Who am I? How do I, elevate myself among the boredom and the whatever the aftermath of World War II and the Korean War is, and how do I come up with an identity for myself? And you start to hear it in these songs. You hear it in the songs of the Animals. Boom, 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 boom. I'm going to shoot you right down. And then in 1969, when Abe Trieger calls me up and says, Abramson, there's this band doing the Stones' Little Red Rooster, and they're playing, right by Wrigley Field. We should go see them. They do the Stones' Little Red Rooster, man. We got to go. And well, where is it? It's a quiet night. And I didn't know what that was. I don't know if I'd ever been in a bar, except, in Champaign. And so we go. And, you heard the part about, who are these guys sitting at this table? But when they get up there, when Eddie Shaw starts singing Stoop Down Baby and Let Your Daddy See, and you just kind of like the light went on. And I can see this larger than life attitude. And it's kind of funny because, these are guys that you wouldn't really think, if you look at your orientation towards most Black people you're going to run into in the city of Chicago, the idea of I'm the baddest and I got something you don't. It didn't really connect until then. And then when the Wolf got up there, he probably didn't have to say anything. He probably could have just moaned, but because it was, where is a kid like me going to encounter a presence like that and not be scared, be more in awe, but not think like, what are these guys going to do to me? And the names. This wasn't, ladies and gentlemen, Chester Burnett. This was the Howlin' Wolf. And I mean, Eddie, I'm pretty sure at times was a majority of guys in that band had glamorous names, or I have described that band as like you could equate them to like the Avengers or Justice League of America. They all almost like had superpowers, or they were like these larger than life characters. You had Sunnyland Slim, and then later on you had Detroit Jr., who had a face like a fucking chopping block or a butcher's block. He had all those scars, and was a Chicken House Shorty, who every step he looked like he was going to fall over. And you had Hubert with the teeth out, and so it was, and Eddie was like his superpowers were like being the lover boy. He just had that thing, and when he got up on that stage, man, it was like this guy has probably slept with every woman he's ever made eye contact with, and so then we started going. We started listening to the records. We started going to see Muddy, and then. When you hear Muddy, and I've talked about this before, I talked about it when Joseph died. A woman from Channel 11 called me up and she says, can you compare the charisma of Muddy and the charisma of Joseph? And I said, Joseph lit up a room. He had such a smile and he had such a joy in his performance. And I think a certain amount of that came from the fact that he was in awe of himself just being able to do it, because he'd seen it all around him his whole life. And now he decided at the age of 50 or whatever to do it. And it was so gratifying for him. But he had an infectious kind of joy about him. Muddy, when Muddy got up to the mic, he was singing for 400 years of people brought over here in chains, stripped of their history, their family, their names, their culture, everything, beat, whipped, dog sick on them, lynched, everything that you could throw at somebody to break them. And Muddy stood up at that mic and he sang, "I'm a man." And people, what it's like, man. How can we keep the blues relevant? How can we keep the blues relevant? The blues is the most relevant piece of it's the most relevant art form in the history of America, and it's more relevant now than it's ever been.
Yeah,
because of the times, there was this other dimension to it, that these guys had made it out of Mississippi alive and brought us their music. It was like the Holy Grail. It was like, you had dove to the bottom of the sea and came back with buried treasure or something. Well, yeah, it's, it gets to something that I assumed about Muddy when I got to know Muddy, and which is, shouldn't these guys like hate all the white people? But I guess if you really, if you don't let go of some of that shit, it's going to just eat away at you beyond your ability to function.
he loved us.
Well, it was
Because we loved him even more.
so, but I didn't really get, the roots of that swagger and any of that stuff. None of it at the time. And, I met Muddy. He was at Alice's, and we were so excited to have discovered Alice's because they didn't serve alcohol and you could sit right at the foot of the stage. And so, first time we went there, showtime was 9:30, which is like 10:15 in the language of the blues. And we sat right on the floor with our legs crossed. You could do that when you're 19 for 3 hours. And finally, this was 7:00 when they opened the doors. And you could hear that hiss of the espresso machine. I don't know if it was the first espresso machine in Chicago, but it was the first one I ever heard. And then, 7:30, 7:45, people start coming in, and by like 9:15, I got to go to the bathroom, and I can't get out because people are behind me. So I figure, all right, well, it's a low stage. It's like, what, a foot high? I'll use the band's bathroom. So I weave my way through the amps and the wires and the drums and pull a curtain aside. And there's Muddy with the big afro, and he's sitting there with a champagne and a paper cup, and I'm like paralyzed. And I say, man, I love your music. Thank you. And can I use your bathroom? It's right over there. And came out of the bathroom and said it again, man. I love your music, man. And said thank you. And I went back out, and every time Muddy was there, I went to the bathroom. So I got to talk to him a little bit, and then I was part of a group that was in Champaign. You go back to Champaign, and I'm only paying $600 a semester for tuition, but it's a wealthy school. They have the Stones played there, Aretha, the Temptations, Jefferson Airplane, Jethro Tull. No blues. You cannot get from Mississippi to Chicago without riding through Champaign on a train. No blues. So I see a flyer at the University Record Store. It's a bunch of guys. And I say that, there might have been some women in the group, but I remember a few guys. And and they were putting up their own money to produce a blues show. So, okay, cool, whatever it takes. And we had harmonica Frank Floyd and Furry Lewis and some other people that I have a photograph of, these two like white guys with long hair. I don't know. I just can't remember who they were, but and we made our money back. So then we had Jim Brewer and Hound Dog Taylor, and then we made some money, and so that established that. And then, I got to know Bruce a little bit, and I got to know Jim pretty well. And I graduate from Champaign, and I come home, and my mother says, you can't live in this house. You look like Charles Manson. So my buddy Abe calls me up, and I was talking to myself, what am I going to do? I can't live at home anymore. And he had just graduated from Northwestern, and he says he found a fraternity house. It was empty for the summer and was renting out rooms for $1 a night. And the irony is it was ATO, which was notoriously anti-Semitic and wouldn't let a Jew in if their lives depended on it over the summer dating. And I'm like, from the time I got into this stuff, I'm like an evangelist for the blues. I would show up at parties with a dozen LPs that nobody wanted to hear. But I'd bring, listen to this, Snooks Eaglin. But I did the same thing in this fraternity house. I went from room to room, and there was one guy listening. He said, come on in. It sounds cool. And it was Ted Kurland.
Ah.
Ted, he was going to school at Brandeis. He was from Champaign, and he was working on the South Side doing, some, good work for the summer. And he says, these guys? And I took him to Homesick James' apartment. When Homesick James was living on Honorary, kind of like in one of those below grade apartments, it was almost like you're living under the sidewalk. You know what I mean? You look out the window and the sidewalk is up there. And that was like, Homesick James was a show just to hear his stories and talk about, pissed off guys. But he was cool. He was fine. And so Ted says to me, he says, look, I'm managing a guy named Gary Burton. He's a jazz vibes player. And I'm going to start a jazz talent agency. These guys, why don't you move out to Boston and we'll partner up and you can bring the blues guys out. So the night so I move out there. I drive out with them, and we drive 21 hours. We get there 5th of July, 9:00 at night. And we didn't stop to unload the car or get something to eat or wash up. We went right to Joe's place in Cambridge. And there's I just love telling this story. I mean, you've seen this a million times, but it's got so much romance to it. I said, and it was a broken down place with a green wood door, and there was nailed to this door was a torn piece of cardboard, brown cardboard from a box, and handwritten on it was tonight, Sonny, Terry, and Brownie McGee.
Wow.
And $2 probably. And we go in, and then they're not on. There's a white kid playing, and he's about my age, and he's got an acoustic guitar with a rack, and he's doing Hank Williams, and he's doing Elmore James, and he's doing Chuck Berry and Bo Diddley.
Right.
And we had booked some Hound Dog Taylor shows at Sandy's Concert Club in Beverly. You remember that place? This is the guy. Sandy, while the bands were playing, there's a bar. He'd leave the hockey games on the TV with the sound up. So nobody would leave because they couldn't hear the hockey game. And he was paying Hound Dog $100 a night, and he had $10 for an opening act. And I thought this kid was so great. I called the bar the next morning. I said, "Who was that kid?" He says, "Oh, he hitchhiked here. He hitchhiked up here to play for drinks. He hitchhiked back this morning. He lives with his mother in Delaware. His name's Thorogood." So I called directory assistants, and I saw George at was it the Arcadia in St. Charles? Okay, so about 4 years ago, I hadn't seen him since he was at Wise Fools in 1977, and so I'm backstage with him. He takes me to a room, and I loved it because he told the story the exact same way I do, but from his perspective. He said, man, I just hitched back. He said, come here, I want to tell a story about you. So he's telling these guys in this room. He says, I just hiked back from Boston, and I wanted to play with Sonny and Brownie, and I'm in my room with a couple of buddies of mine. I'm laying on my bed, and I'm telling them I can't make a living at this blues thing. I got to go to trade school. And the phone rings, and my mom yells, George, there's a guy named Terry on the phone for you from Boston, and he wants to put you on a Hound Dog Taylor show. So he gets on the phone, and I say, well, when is it? He says, I play baseball. I don't know if I can make it. So I said, well, September or whatever. He said, well, hang on, because we might have a problem. I said, all right. He comes back and I said, okay, I'm clear that weekend. I said, great. When can you be here? He said, well, we might have a problem. So what is it now? He said, well, I got no money to get up there, man. And I said, well, Western Union, you money for a train ticket. I said, all right. I said, when can you be here? He said, well, we might have a problem. I said, what is it now? He said, well, I got no place to stay in Boston. So he wound up sleeping. Ted and I had the apartment on Mass Ave and Marlborough Street. He slept on our couch for about 6 weeks, and every night he would sit on the toilet teaching himself guitar. He liked the echo in the bathroom, all the time. And so then I'm thinking, he went on the Hound Dog Taylor shows for $10 a night, and we took a 15% commission. So then I think this is a good time to bring Jim Brewer out, because George is just playing with acoustic guitar and a rack. And I think, you got one act, it's a show. You got two acts, it's a festival. So I started booking them as acoustic blues festivals. And, we did schools from Boston to Buffalo. And, I had to pick George up, and I thought, whenever I would see Jim, whether it was at Alice's or in Champaign or No Exit, wherever, Roy Filson, remember Roy? Roy was a tall guy, kind of, that was Jim's like caretaker. He'd go pick Jim up on the West Side and take him to his gigs. And
not by that name.
Roy would lead him to the stage. He'd take Roy's arm and he'd sit him down, hand him his guitar, and then he'd take him down when it was over. So we figured, he's blind. So I got like 1,000 flyers and say, George Thorogood, blind Jim Brewer. Now, there was no direct train between Chicago and Boston. And I'm not going to make blind Jim change trains. So I drive down to New York. And I double park on 8th Avenue, and I run down into Penn Station, and there's Jim waiting on the platform with his guitar and his suitcase. And I say, here I am. And he takes my arm. We go up the escalator. We come out onto the street. We're maybe 75 yards from my car. Blind Jim Brewer stops dead, and he points at my car, and he says, you still got that red car? I say, what? He says, the red car with the white top. You had that in Chicago. You took me around in that. And my stomach is like rising up into my throat. I say, I thought you were blind. I got you 6 weeks of work as blind Jim Brewer. He says, well, I got cataracts, but that ain't the language of the blues. So we cool with blind. so he was cool, but he never blew our cover. But so we had a gig one night at Dean Junior College in Franklin, Mass, about 40 miles southwest of Boston. And it's notable for two reasons. Number one, this was September 73, and the woman who was a concert chairman is raving about a kid who had been there 2 nights earlier, and he was a friend. Somebody in his band was friends with somebody at the school or something, and she says, they played for 3 hours. They were amazing. This guy was incredible. I said, really? She says, you watch for him. Bruce Springsteen. And the other thing was, we're riding home, after the gig. And then Jim opens up and he says, man, did you see that woman in the audience in the red dress? He says, I'd surely like to plug into her. So I start vamping. The men call me Jim. The women call me Electric Man. When I plug into your socket, I'll charge you like no one else can. See, at that time, it was just, to me, it was like Stoop Down Baby. It was a snappy rhyme. And I'm not really identifying consciously that I had seized on this same kind of swagger that came out of Hoochie Coochie Man, and I'm a man, and Rolling Stone, I'm a crawling king snake, and So Muddy comes to Boston about 4 weeks later. He's at Paul's Mall, and I go backstage, and he knew my face from the bathroom, but he didn't really know my name or anything. I go, hey man, well, you far from home? And I say, well, I want you to hear something. He says, what do you got? And I said, well, Jim Brewer? He says, yeah, the blind guy. I go, I said, well, Jim wanted you to hear some lyrics I had. And Muddy puts his champagne cup down and he puts his hands on his knees. And there's nobody in this room but us. He says, lay it on me, boy. And I said, the men call me Muddy. The women call me Electric Man. When I plug into your socket, I'll charge you like no one else can. I don't know nothing about voltage, nothing about watts. When I plug into you, girl, I'll make you awful hot. I'll charge it up in the daytime. I'll let it loose at night. When I let it loose in you, girl, you'll glow just like a light. And he says, that's good shit, boy. Write that down. So, I wrote it down. I came back the next night. We're talking about it. He says, what else you got? And when Jim Brewer was staying with us, Ted said to him one night, he said, Jim, you are so funky. You're the man who put the unk in funk.
Uh-oh.
So I wrote that. And, that was the album, the Unk and Funk album. And, like I always say, are those two songs among his 1,000 best songs? No, but nobody else in history co-wrote 3 songs with Muddy Waters. And so after the gigs, when he was in Boston, we'd walk down Boylston Street at 1 o'clock in the morning to a bar.
Oops. You froze. You froze just there.
Still here?
You froze. When you said you're frozen. Your visual is frozen. When you got to walk into a bar, you got cut off.
Okay. How am I now?
Okay, go for it.
Okay,
you walked into a bar.
So we walk into this bar, Ken's Pub, and we go into the back. In the bar, but near the back, and it was dark, and there's just like the light of a candle, one of those like red globes with the white plastic mesh around. And he'd say, get the napkins, boy. And I'd go up to the bartender and I'd get a stack of cocktail napkins. And we'd sit there at 1 o'clock in the morning and we bounce song ideas off of each other, and I write them down on the napkins. And in 75, we were at the Bottom Line in the Village, and Johnny Winter was there, and Johnny had been on him to come to Columbia, blah 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 blah, and Muddy had, and Muddy made more money with chess. I mean, he might have bitched about those guys, but he appreciated the fact that he had gotten pretty high up because of that. And he also, I won't call it a plantation mentality quite, but there was a security issue for him, security dimension to it. Chess, I don't know if they'd been bought by MCA yet or not, but he felt comfortable there. And he was the top guy in the totem pole, Chuck Berry, Muddy Waters, Bo Diddley. And is he going to get lost at Columbia with Dylan and Streisand and Billy Joel in Chicago? And, but, he said to me, he said, what do you think of this Johnny Winter? And I said, you know what? When you come over to my house for dinner, I'm going to play you something. And he came over to my house like A few weeks later, and I played him Broke Down Engine by Johnny Winter. You know that one? It sounds like, I mean, it doesn't sound like it's Robert Johnson, but it sounds like it could have been a Robert Johnson song. It's off of the Progressive Blues Experiment. And Mike sat there and smiled. And so we're talking, and he said, well, I think I'm going to go to Columbia and where are the napkins? You got the napkins? So we go through the napkins. And there was a song my baby wrote off with the bus driver, and it just don't seem right. He was giving her rides in the daytime. Now she gives him rides at night, which, has the snap. It doesn't have the I'm bad and I'm larger than life. But even, man, when I wrote those two songs, Unkin' Funk and Electric Man, I wasn't consciously, I mean, I was trying to be in the Muddy Waters groove. I'm not going to, give them, it's a beautiful afternoon. Let's go for a walk holding hands and pick daisies. But I didn't know what it meant. I had no idea of the art as a tool for survival dimension to what gave birth to the blues. And and you hear it in the lyrics, you hear it in the names that these people chose for themselves. You hear it in the call and response as a way to bond in the cotton fields when no communication was the rule. And it's so beautiful and so powerful and so like organically woven into the history of this country.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Hey, man, thank you. It was great.